continuing with the theme that you should run for office because you are better than what we've got. I give you Matt Kid Diddlin Gaetz.
I've seen an exclusive, a source familiar with the House Ethics Committee investigation into allegations of sex crimes against Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz suggests that probe may now be heating up. You may recall there was a Justice Department investigation that ended with no charges against Gaetz. Plus, after the ouster of former Speaker Kevin McCarthy, McCarthy said Gaetz was angry with him because of the Ethics Committee probe. Joined now by CNN legal analyst and former federal prosecutor.
We covered that here. I was furious. I remain furious. That is a failure of law enforcement on par with Jim Acosta's handling of the Epstein investigation when he decided to let Jeffrey Epstein go.
Jennifer Rogers and by our chief legal affairs correspondent Paula Reed, who helped break this story. So what more have you learned about what the Ethics Committee is doing?
So I've learned that the Ethics Committee has done a new round of outreach, and they have reached out to this woman who was still 17 when she allegedly had sex with Congressman Gaetz. They've also reached out to the Justice Department, seeking materials from its years-long investigation into the congressman. Now, the investigation into the congressman actually began under Trump-appointed Attorney General Bill Barr. It went on for several years, expanding beyond the allegations of just sex with this underage girl to also look at possible sex trafficking, possible lobbying violations, as well as...
Real quick, let me give you the details that Joel Greenberg admitted to and told police. They wrote it down and then did nothing with it. Here's what happened. Gaetz and Joel Greenberg Venmo'd a 17-year-old money so she would prostitute herself for these gentlemen. Now, I'll be honest with you folks. I don't care about prostitution. I think that's a fine trade to be in if that's your skill. Good. Folks need it. Lord knows he's not sweet-talking anybody into bedroom. I'm also fine with drinking. I'm somewhat fine with smoking. If you're an adult, those are adult things that adults can choose to do. Want to sign up for the military and be a soldier? That's fine if you're an adult. If you're not, you are called a child soldier. That's not fine. If you pay a 17-year-old girl to have sex with you, what you've done called child prostitution. That I am not okay with. The sex trafficking, they transported her across state lines for the purposes of having sex with her, this child. Joel Greenberg and Matt Gaetz, according to Joel Greenberg. That, ladies and gentlemen, is child sex trafficking, which that scummy guy right there appears to have engaged in.
Obstruction of justice. But last year, we broke the news that he would not be charged. They did not pursue charges. And in response to the fact that the Ethics Committee is looking into what DOJ did, as well.
No. I interrupted, rather, an important thing. Listen to this chain of events.
Expanding beyond the allegations of just sex with this art. Now, the investigation of the congressman actually began under Trump-appointed Attorney General Bill Barr. It went on for several years, expanding beyond the allegations of just sex with this underage girl to also look at possible sex trafficking, possible lobbying violations, as well as obstruction of justice. But last year, we broke the news that he would not be charged. They did not pursue charges. And in response...
God, look at that face. Oh, he makes it so easy to hate him.
To the fact that the Ethics Committee is looking into what DOJ did, as well as reaching out to this woman, the congressman told us, quote, those allegations were not true, have not been true, and the people who spread those lies have been exposed, indicted, and imprisoned.
And Jennifer, does the DOJ have to comply with the committee's request for documents?
They do not, and they probably will not, because nothing was ever charged here. So materials that are gathered as part of a criminal investigation are deemed confidential. So I'd be surprised if they give them really anything worthwhile. They can do their own investigation. They can go out.
All right, let's just pause there for a second. The charges were dropped, which means the DOJ is unlikely to share the information they gathered. That means that politicians will have to gather their own information. All right? We got that. Good.
And interview witnesses, as apparently they're trying to do, collect documents via subpoena and all of that, but they won't get what DOJ has.
They wouldn't turn over, even though it's Congress asking, I mean, a committee in Congress asking?
Likely not. I mean, if they had charged something and these materials had become public, but they're very careful with materials that don't make their way into the public realm, because if you don't charge, then it's deemed that it wasn't worthy of charging, so you don't want to smear people's names by turning over evidence.
So the committee now, I mean, it's controlled by Republicans. It started under the House Democrats, though, didn't it?
Yeah,
We're about to go into something very important. I just want to... let's just keep the chain.
exactly. It started in 2021, but then when the Justice Department investigation became public, they decided to yield to the federal probe. But then when
They decided to yield to the federal probe. In other words, to stop doing their investigation. This is after we saw what happened with the January 6th committee. Ask yourself something. Who, by and large, are law enforcement made of? Are they made up of left-wing folks, or are they made up of the very most conservative folks in the United States? Does law enforcement tend, we're talking generally here, do they tend to vote for Republicans or Democrats? Okay, neat. Do people who vote for Republicans tend to play fair, tend to respect the law, tend to obey the rules? No. From now on, when there are any Democrats at all on any committee at all, they must not yield to law enforcement on anything, because law enforcement F's up. Law enforcement keeps giving passes to Republicans. They will generally give a pass to anybody who is powerful, but especially if they're Republican. Maybe, I happen to think this, maybe it's an intentional bias. Maybe they think, I don't want to weaken the country as a whole. I'm a Republican. I don't have ethics, so I'm not going to even pretend in my own heart to be following ethics. I'm just going to let this good old boy go. After all, she was 17. She's practically an old maid in my eyes. I'm a Republican. Child sex trafficking, I love that. I'm a Republican. All right, you get what I get. The point being, being less facetious, there is, less jokingly, at the very least, an unconscious bias. Don't trust that. Don't yield to law enforcement. It doesn't hurt things to do your own probe into this activity. In fact, it makes it embarrassing for these folks when you find things that they failed to. I give you the January 6th committee. If somebody makes a argument that it does interfere, I would say too bad, because otherwise we are left with the situation we're in now, where we the people must just trust the DOJ to go after these people. You know, the same folks that let Epstein go the first time around, the same folks that let Matt Gaetz go, the same folks that let Oliver North go, the same folks that let Richard Nixon go, the same folks that let George W. Bush go, the same folks that tried their best to let Donald Trump get away with an insurrection, except for the January 6th committee, which did not yield, which did not sit on their hands instead of doing their job because they had an excuse. How do we affect this? When you have Democrats on a committee. Be in their ear constantly. On a committee like this, on a committee talking about ethics, when there is a criminal investigation that's going to start as well, be in their ear from day one saying, don't you fuck me on this. Don't you if we find out there's a criminal investigation that does not affect what you're doing over the weekend, you're still seeing this thing through, because otherwise you will give them an opportunity to say nothing to see here. Now, we got lucky. We got very lucky, because Matt Gaetz did the only thing that will cause a Republican to pursue anything resembling justice, which is Matt Gaetz made an enemy of the Republicans. He challenged their power. So now, for very corrupt reasons, they are reopening a legitimate ethics investigation. Good. See it through.
When the federal investigation wrapped up last year without any charges, this was revived. And Gaetz has told people privately he blamed then House Speaker Kevin McCarthy for allowing the ethics probe to be resuscitated. And McCarthy has said publicly that he thinks Gaetz's frustration over this ethics probe is why he led the push, right, to get McCarthy out of the speakership. But you see, even in a post-Speaker McCarthy world, this investigation not only continues, but it appears to be ramping up.
I want to ask you about the E. Jean Carroll civil defamation trial in New York. The former president's going to be back, or expected to be back in court tomorrow. Is he going to actually testify?
That's a great question. So my sources tell me that he is still.
So look, if you pay an adult prostitute to go on vacation with you, and you and your buddy do a lovely Eiffel Tower for the whole weekend, you're more qualified for public office than Matt Gaetz. More power to you. You're a job creator. Fine. So long as the prostitute was of age, you're more qualified than Matt Gaetz. Here's a bonus round. If that prostitute that you hired wasn't in any way using funds that were donated to you for the purposes of a campaign, if you didn't pay her with those, congratulations. You're more qualified for office. Matt Gaetz. Run for something. Link is in the description. You are qualified. You don't, I would say for your own stress, use the first link in the description to find an office you'd be comfortable with, a job you think you could do well. But I cannot stress enough, and this should scare you, no matter how unqualified you are for any office, there's a 50% chance that a Republican is in it, and therefore you are more qualified than the person who's currently doing the job. Run for something. If you have no idea what you're doing, if you cannot start your car reliably, not because there's anything wrong with it, but because you're such a klutz that you keep dropping the keys down into a sewer grate, you're still more qualified for office than half of the people running the most powerful country on earth. Run for something.